The house is no longer yours, Character A. Everything is in my name.
No! How could you? I demand to know how you can be so certain about this.
The proof is right in front of you.
He wouldn't lie about something like this.
Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. Welcome.
Mr. Davies, I have everything here.
Please have a seat.
Thank you. Let's get started.
I need you to find my father's old file. It's the key.
What is this?
This house isn't yours anymore. Malcolm said it from across our dining table as if 38 years of marriage could be erased with one sentence. Beside him, Trevor stood with his arms folded while a thick folder of legal papers sat between us. For a moment, I couldn't speak. This was the house where my father had taught me to stand on my own feet, long before Malcolm ever carried a suitcase through the front door. I looked at my husband and asked quietly, "Are you absolutely sure?" He pushed the folder toward me. "The papers are clear." 3 days later, I sat across from Howard Bennett, my father's old attorney. I slid Malcolm's documents across his desk. Then I said, "Howard, please find the file my father left with you. If this happened to you, would you fight for the marriage or walk away after a betrayal like this? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about family dignity and the truths people try to hide, please like and subscribe. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now." 6 months before Malcolm told me I no longer owned my own home. I would have laughed if anyone had suggested that a house could become the thing that nearly destroyed my marriage. Not because Malcolm and I never argued. After 38 years together, we had argued about everything from money to vacations, to whether the thermostat belonged at 68 or 72. But those were ordinary disagreements, the kind you eventually learn to live around. I was 67, then retired after more than 3 decades working as an administrative coordinator at a hospital in Richmond, Virginia. I had spent most of my adult life organizing other people's emergencies. Retirement was supposed to be quieter. Most mornings I woke before Malcolm made coffee and sat beside the kitchen window overlooking the backyard. There was an old dogwood tree near the fence that my father had planted when I was 17. That tree had survived storms, droughts, one lightning strike, and several terrible attempts by Malcolm to prune it. So had the house. The house was older than my marriage. Long before I became Georgina Atwood, I had been Georgina Mercer, a skinny girl running barefoot through those rooms while my mother shouted that I was going to ruin her floors. My parents, Walter and Eleanor Mercer, bought the place when I was 11. It wasn't grand. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, red brick, a narrow front porch, and hardwood floors that creaked loudly enough to expose anyone trying to sneak into the kitchen after midnight. But my parents loved it, my father especially. Walter Mercer believed almost anything could be repaired if you had patience, the right tools, and enough coffee. He repaired the porch himself. He rebuilt the kitchen cabinets. He replaced the upstairs railing after I broke 2 spindles sliding down it when I was 13. Everywhere I looked, some part of him remained. After my mother died, the house became even more important to him, and to me. By then, I had already gone through a brief first marriage that gave me my daughter Natalie and taught me more about disappointment than I wanted to know. Dad never criticized me for that marriage. He simply helped me start again. That was the kind of man he was. One afternoon, not long after I turned 28, I found him repairing a loose board on the back porch. "You know what your trouble is, Georgie?" he asked. I smiled. "How much time do you have?" He laughed. Then his expression became serious. "You think security is something somebody gives you." I remember rolling my eyes. "I have a job, Dad. I know. I pay my bills. I know that too." "Then what are you talking about?" He drove another nail into the board, then looked at me. "A woman should always have something no one can take away from her." I never forgot the sentence. But for years I misunderstood it. I thought he was simply talking about money. Years later, when I married Malcolm, Dad welcomed him. Malcolm was 32 when I met him, confident without being loud, the kind of man who remembered the waitress's name and always carried jumper cables in his trunk. I had a son from his previous marriage. Trevor was 5 then. Natalie was 3. We weren't some perfect television family, but we built something that felt real. Malcolm moved into the Richmond house after our wedding. Technically, it had come through my family. Emotionally, however, I never treated it as mine. I never said my house. I said our house. When Malcolm wanted to turn the basement into a recreation room, we did it. When he planted roses beside the driveway, I complained that they would die. They didn't. When we needed a new roof, we paid for it from the household budget. When the furnace failed one January, Malcolm stayed awake half the night trying to keep the pipes from freezing until the repairman arrived. He invested himself in that house, and I loved him for it. Over nearly 4 decades, it became impossible to separate my memories of my parents' home from the life Malcolm and I had built there. Birthday cakes, Christmas mornings, graduation photographs, arguments, apologies, funerals, grandchildren racing through the hallway. The kitchen still had a faint pencil mark inside the pantry doorway where Malcolm had measured Natalie and Trevor as they grew. That was why I never imagined I would one day need to defend my right to remain there. To me, it wasn't an asset. It was the geography of my life. Things began changing when Trevor started visiting more often. At first, I was pleased. At 43, Trevor had become a real estate developer. He had always been ambitious. Even as a teenager, he could turn mowing 3 lawns into a neighborhood landscaping operation by the end of the summer. Malcolm admired that about him. So did I in many ways. Trevor had always called me Georgina rather than Mom, which I respected. He had a mother. I never tried to replace her, but I had helped raise him. I'd attended his baseball games, sat through parent-teacher conferences, and stayed awake beside Malcolm when Trevor didn't come home on time. He was family. That was why his sudden attention didn't immediately concern me. He started coming by on Sunday afternoons. Sometimes he brought pastries. Sometimes he claimed he was just checking on his father. Then I began noticing the questions. One Sunday, Trevor stood at the kitchen window looking toward the backyard. "You've got a pretty deep lot here," he said. "I suppose. You know how rare that is, this close to everything." I laughed. "Rare enough that your grandfather spent every Saturday complaining about mowing it." Trevor smiled, but his eyes remained on the yard. Another time he asked when we'd last renovated the kitchen. Then he wanted to know whether the windows were original. A week later, he stood outside staring at the roofline. "You ever thought about adding on to the back?" "At my age," I said, "I'm trying to own fewer things that require cleaning." He laughed. Malcolm did too. I thought nothing of it. But Trevor's questions continued. He asked about the neighborhood, recent sales, whether we had ever considered moving somewhere smaller. I finally teased him. "Are you planning to buy us out?" Trevor smiled. "Just occupational curiosity." That answer satisfied me then. It shouldn't have. One evening after Trevor left, I found Malcolm standing near the front window, watching his son's car disappear down the street. "He's been around a lot lately," I said. Malcolm kept looking outside. "He's going through some things." "What things?" "Business." I waited. Malcolm had always told me when Trevor was struggling. This time he didn't. "Is he all right? He'll figure it out." There was something in his voice I couldn't identify. Not fear exactly. Pressure. I walked over and touched his arm. "If he needs help, he can ask." Malcolm finally looked at me. For one strange second, I had the feeling he wanted to say something. Instead, he kissed my forehead. "You worry too much, Georgie." Then he went upstairs. I remained by the window. Across the street, our neighbor's porch light had come on. Somewhere farther down the block, a dog barked. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Safe, familiar, permanent. I didn't know that Trevor had already stopped looking at our house as the place where his father lived. He was beginning to look at it as something else. Something with a price. And soon Malcolm would too. Trevor's questions didn't stop. If anything, they became more specific. At first, I told myself that was simply how his mind worked. Real estate had been his world for almost 20 years. Some people walked into a house and noticed family photographs or the smell of dinner cooking. Trevor noticed square footage, property lines, and what the place might sell for. But one Sunday afternoon, he asked me a question that made me put down my coffee. "Do you still have a mortgage on this place?" We were sitting at the kitchen table after lunch. Malcolm was at the sink rinsing plates, and Trevor was scrolling through something on his phone. I looked at him. That's a personal question. He glanced up and smiled. I didn't mean it that way. I was just thinking about how long you've been here. Long enough. Malcolm chuckled without turning around. Your father-in-law hated debt, he said. Walter practically treated interest like a contagious disease. That was true. Dad had believed that owing money meant somebody else had a claim on your peace of mind. Trevor nodded slowly. So it's paid off? There it was again, not curiosity, calculation. I leaned back in my chair. Why does it matter it doesn't? Then why are you asking? Trevor slipped his phone into his pocket. Occupational habit. Georgina, that's all. Malcolm turned from the sink. Leave her alone, Trev. Trevor raised both hands. All right, forget I asked. The conversation moved on, but I didn't forget. A week later, Trevor stopped by again. This time, he brought a bottle of wine for Malcolm and a small lemon cake from a bakery I liked. It was thoughtful enough that I felt slightly guilty for having been suspicious. Then, while Malcolm opened the wine, Trevor asked whether we knew how much our property taxes had increased. I stared at him. You're very interested in our finances lately. He laughed. I'm interested in property. This property in particular. Something passed over his face. Only for a second. Then the smile returned. Because it's a good property. Malcolm handed him a glass. She's going to start charging you consulting fees if you keep interrogating her. Trevor laughed. I did too. But the uneasiness remained. Over the next several weeks, he mentioned the market value of homes in our neighborhood at least 3 times. He told us a renovated house 6 blocks away had sold for far more than its asking price. He mentioned retirees who sold large homes and moved into luxury condominiums. He even showed Malcolm photographs of a development west of Richmond. No yard work, Trevor said. No exterior maintenance. Everything on one level. I looked over Malcolm's shoulder at the screen. The condo was beautiful. It was also somebody else's home. We're not moving, I said. Trevor looked at me. I didn't say you were. You've brought up downsizing 4 times. I'm making conversation. Then let's talk about baseball. Malcolm laughed. Trevor didn't. Later that evening after he left, Malcolm surprised me. You know he isn't completely wrong. I was loading the dishwasher. About baseball, about downsizing. I stopped. Malcolm leaned against the counter. This house is a lot for 2 people. I stared at him. Only 3 months earlier, Malcolm had spent an entire Saturday building new shelves in the garage because, according to him, we were never leaving this place. Now suddenly the house was too much. Since when? He shrugged. I'm just thinking about the future. The future didn't bother you when you bought that riding mower. That mower was on sale. I smiled despite myself. Normally he would have smiled too. He didn't. Instead, he looked toward the hallway. We're getting older, Georgie, so maybe we should think practically. I closed the dishwasher. Did Trevor put this idea in your head? His expression hardened slightly. He didn't put anything in my head. I didn't say he did anything wrong. You didn't have to. That irritated me. Then tell me why you're suddenly talking about selling a house you've loved for 38 years. I didn't say sell. You said downsize. There's a difference. Not unless you're planning to fit this house inside a smaller one. That earned a reluctant smile. For a moment the tension broke. Malcolm walked over and kissed my forehead. Forget it, he said. It was just a thought. I wanted to. So I did. Or at least I tried. Then came the night in the garage. It was a Thursday. I remember because Natalie had called after dinner to complain about a faculty meeting, and we had talked nearly 40 minutes. When we hung up, I realized Malcolm hadn't come back inside. Trevor had arrived earlier that evening without warning. The 2 of them had disappeared into the garage after dinner. I assumed they were looking at Malcolm's old Buick. Around 9. I went downstairs to remind Malcolm that he had a doctor's appointment the next morning. As I crossed the kitchen, I heard voices through the door leading into the garage. Trevor's voice was low but urgent. I'm not saying sell tomorrow. I stopped. Malcolm said something I couldn't hear. Then Trevor answered. You keep acting like I'm asking for the whole thing. Silence. Then came the sentence I would remember later. We don't need all of it. We just need to unlock the equity. My hand froze inches from the doorknob. Equity. There was no mistaking that word. They weren't discussing Trevor's business. They were discussing my house. Malcolm answered quietly. I told you Georgina isn't going to Trevor cut him off. She doesn't understand what we're talking about. My stomach tightened. I opened the door. Both men turned toward me. Trevor was leaning against Malcolm's workbench. Papers were spread beside him. The moment he saw me, he moved one hand across them, not dramatically, just enough. What don't I understand? I asked. Trevor straightened. Nothing. I heard my name. Malcolm stepped toward me. We were talking about finances. Whose neither answered immediately. That silence frightened me more than any answer could have. I looked at Trevor. You said something about equity. His expression changed. Then he gave me that easy professional smile. Your project has potential equity. I looked at Malcolm. He wouldn't meet my eyes. What kind of project? Trevor gathered the papers. It's complicated. I worked in hospital administration for 34 years. I've survived insurance companies, surgeons, payroll audits, and 3 different computer systems. Try me. Trevor forced a laugh. It's nothing you need to worry about. There was something deeply insulting about that sentence. I turned to Malcolm. Do I need to worry? No. His answer came quickly. Too quickly. Then why were you discussing me? We weren't discussing you. I heard my name. Malcolm rubbed the back of his neck. Trev is under some pressure with one of his developments. That's all. What kind of pressure? Business pressure. That doesn't explain why you said I wasn't going to do something. Trevor picked up the papers. I should go. I stepped aside from the doorway. Yes. Maybe you should. Malcolm shot me a look. Trevor walked past without another word. A minute later, I heard his car start. Malcolm remained in the garage. I looked at the empty space on the workbench where the papers had been. What is happening? Nothing is happening. Then why are you acting like something is? He sighed. Georgina, please. Don't Georgina please me. His shoulders dropped. Trevor's having some problems with a development. He asked my advice. And the equity his business. And me, Malcolm hesitated. That hesitation told me everything except the details. He asked whether we'd ever considered downsizing, Malcolm finally said. That conversation again. How was brainstorming? With our house, no decision has been made. I stared at him. No decision. The words sounded wrong. Not because I had made a decision. Because I had never known there was one to make. Malcolm, this isn't a business property. I know. This is our home. I know that too. Then why is Trevor discussing its equity? He looked tired suddenly. Because property has value, Georgie. That's reality. I studied my husband's face. For almost 4 decades, I had known his expressions. I knew when he was angry, embarrassed, worried, or pretending everything was fine. That night, I saw something different. Fear. Not for himself. For Trevor. I softened slightly. If he's in trouble, tell me. Malcolm shook his head. He'll handle it. Then let him. His eyes lifted to mine. Something about those 3 words seemed to bother him. Let him. Let Trevor handle his own problems. I walked back into the kitchen, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had interrupted something much larger than a conversation. For the first time in 38 years, decisions about my home were being discussed behind a closed door. And somehow I was the one person they believed didn't need to understand. For the next 2 weeks, Malcolm behaved as if the conversation in the garage had never happened. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me more uneasy. Trevor stopped asking questions about the house. Malcolm stopped mentioning downsizing. Our evenings returned to their familiar rhythm dinner, the local news. Malcolm falling asleep in his recliner while insisting he was only resting his eyes. If I hadn't heard Trevor say the words "unlock the equity," I might have convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Then one Tuesday morning, Malcolm placed a thick envelope beside my coffee. We need to update some paperwork. I looked at the envelope. What paperwork? Estate planning. He said it casually, then sat across from me. I smiled faintly. That's a cheerful breakfast conversation. I'm serious, Georgie. So am I. He didn't smile. That caught my attention. Malcolm folded his hands on the table. We're not getting younger. If something happens to one of us, the other shouldn't have to spend months sorting through paperwork. That part made sense. We had friends who'd spent years untangling estates after a spouse died. I'd seen enough families turn grief into arguments over bank accounts, furniture, and property to know that planning ahead was sensible. Did something happen? I asked. No. Doctor say something you didn't tell me. No. Then why now? He sighed. Because we're 70 and 67, Georgina. Do we really need a crisis before we organize things again? Reasonable. Almost too reasonable. I opened the envelope. Inside were several documents clipped together. Some concerned beneficiary designations. Others referenced financial accounts and authority in the event one of us became unable to manage our affairs. There were small yellow tabs beside signature lines. I glanced at Malcolm. You've already marked where I sign. It saves time. Who prepared these? A financial planning service Trevor knows. There it was. Trevor. I looked back at the documents. Is this connected to his business problem? Malcolm's jaw tightened. No. Then why is his financial planning contact preparing our documents? Because he recommended them. I turned the first page. I'd like to read everything, of course. But Malcolm's tone suggested he hadn't expected me to. I started slowly. Years of hospital administration had taught me something simple: never sign what you haven't read. People assumed administrative work meant answering phones and arranging schedules. In reality, I had spent decades reviewing contracts, insurance correspondence, consent forms, and documents where one sentence could change everything. Malcolm knew that. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. He became restless. You don't have to analyze every comma. I kept reading. You told me these documents matter. They do. Then the commas matter. He stood and poured himself more coffee. It's standard language, standard for what estate planning. That isn't an answer. He exhaled loudly. I ignored him and continued. Most of the language was tedious but understandable. Then I reached a section concerning authority over property and financial decisions. I read it twice. Malcolm noticed. That part is standard. You've said that 3 times. Because it is. I pointed to the paragraph. This gives broad authority, in certain circumstances. What circumstances? They're explained there. I know what it says. I'm asking what you think it means. He pulled the document toward himself. It means if one of us can't handle things, the other can. Then why does this language seem broader than incapacity? He looked down. For perhaps 3 seconds, Malcolm said nothing. Then he pushed the papers back. Because lawyers write everything broadly. These weren't prepared by our lawyer. Financial planners, lawyers, same kind of language. No, Malcolm, not the same thing. His irritation became visible. Georgina, thousands of married couples sign documents like this. Then one of those thousands can explain it to me. What is that supposed to mean? It means I'm not signing until someone independent reviews it. The room changed. It happened almost instantly. Malcolm set down his coffee mug harder than necessary. Independent, yes. Independent from whom? The person who prepared it. Trevor. You. Me. His eyes narrowed. You need protection from me now. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I stared at him. Why are you turning this into something personal? Because after 38 years, my wife just told me she needs a lawyer before she can trust something I put in front of her. No. Your wife told you she wants to understand a legal document before signing it. Same thing. It absolutely is not. He pushed his chair back. The legs scraped across the kitchen floor. I felt my heart beating faster, but I refused to raise my voice. Malcolm, if these papers are exactly what you say they are, another attorney will confirm that. So now I'm lying. I didn't say that either. Then sign them. That sentence landed differently. Not because he shouted, because he didn't. He said it quietly, firmly, as if my hesitation itself had become unacceptable. I closed the folder. No. He stared at me. What? I said no. His face hardened. Georgina, not until I understand exactly what I'm signing. He walked toward the window. I watched the man I'd shared my life with stand with his back to me. Part of me wanted to end the argument. That had always been my weakness with Malcolm. Not submission exactly. I simply hated prolonged conflict. Sometimes peace felt more valuable than being right. But my father's voice appeared unexpectedly in my memory. A woman should always have something no one can take away from her. I looked at the folder. Why does this matter so much to you? Malcolm didn't turn around. Because I want things organized. They already are, not properly. According to whom's silence? Trevor. He finally faced me. This isn't about Trevor. Then leave him out of it. He's already out of it. He recommended the people who prepared the papers, because he knows them professionally. And he's been asking about our mortgage, our property taxes, our home value, and whether we're going to downsize. Malcolm rubbed his forehead. You're connecting things that aren't connected. Maybe. I tapped the folder. That's exactly why I want independent advice. His expression shifted. Anger gave way to something more painful. Disappointment. 38 years, he said. I swallowed. What about them? I've spent 38 years taking care of this family. So have I. I've never given you a reason not to trust me. Then don't ask me to prove my trust by signing something I don't understand. His eyes dropped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Malcolm gathered the documents. All right. He shoved them into the envelope. If that's how you feel, that isn't how I feel. You made yourself perfectly clear. No, Malcolm, you're refusing to hear what I'm actually saying. He picked up the envelope. Forget it. He walked out of the kitchen. I heard his footsteps cross the hallway and then the door to his study close. I remained at the table. My coffee had gone cold. For 38 years, Malcolm and I had disagreed countless times, but that morning felt different. He hadn't been angry because I misunderstood him. He'd been angry because I wouldn't sign. That distinction frightened me. At dinner, Malcolm barely spoke. The next morning, the envelope was gone. 3 days passed before I asked where he'd put it. In my office. I'd still like a copy. He looked up from the newspaper. Why? So I can have someone review it. His mouth tightened. I thought we were done with that. We're done discussing whether I'll sign without advice. We're not done with the documents. He folded the newspaper. I'll get you copies. He never did. I asked again the following week. This time he claimed he'd forgotten. A few days later, I went into his study while he was at the hardware store. I wasn't searching his drawers. I wasn't reading his mail. I simply looked at the place on his desk where he'd left the envelope. It wasn't there. Neither were several folders I remembered seeing in our filing cabinet downstairs. That evening, I stood alone in the hallway outside Malcolm's study. For the first time in my marriage, I wondered whether the man on the other side of that door was protecting our future or preparing one without my consent. And once that question entered my mind, I couldn't make it leave. The missing envelope bothered me, but the missing house files frightened me. For years, I had kept our important documents in a 4-drawer filing cabinet in the small room off the kitchen. I knew that cabinet better than Malcolm did. Tax returns in the bottom drawer, insurance policies above them, medical records, warranties, retirement statements, and property documents carefully separated into labeled folders. Organization was one habit retirement hadn't taken from me. The morning after I noticed the papers missing from Malcolm's desk, I opened the cabinet. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then I reached the folder labeled House. It felt too thin. I opened it on the desk. There were utility records, old contractor invoices, homeowners' insurance documents, and receipts for repairs. But several older documents were gone. I searched again. Then a third time. I checked neighboring folders in case I had misfiled them. Nothing. Malcolm walked into the kitchen while I was still searching. What are you doing? Looking for the property records. He stopped. What property records? The older ones. I watched his face, the ones that used to be in here. He walked to the coffee maker. I moved some things. Where the safe deposit box. I stared at him. When, in a while ago. Why for safekeeping? I closed the drawer. You've never cared about keeping them there before. Well, now I do. Which documents did you move? I don't remember exactly. That answer irritated me. You decided certain documents were important enough to take to the bank, but you don't remember which ones. Malcolm poured coffee. Georgina, must everything become an interrogation? No. But everything shouldn't become a secret either. He looked at me over the rim of his mug. They're not secret. I just told you where they are. After I discovered they were gone. His expression hardened. I was trying to organize things. That phrase again. What phrase? Organize things. I stepped closer. You've used it every time I ask why something is changing without me knowing about it. He shook his head. You're looking for reasons to be suspicious. No, Malcolm. I'm noticing reasons. He left without answering. That afternoon, Natalie came over. She usually visited on Saturdays, but she'd called that morning and heard something in my voice. 40 minutes later, her car was in my driveway. Natalie had inherited my mother's ability to know when someone was lying about being fine. She took one look at me and said, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." She put her purse on the counter. "Try again." I made tea. Then I told her. Not everything. I still felt protective of Malcolm. That may sound foolish considering what came later, but 38 years of marriage doesn't disappear the first time someone frightens you. I told Natalie about Trevor's questions. The conversation in the garage, the estate planning documents, Malcolm's anger when I refused to sign, and finally the missing property records. Natalie listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat silently for several seconds. Then she asked, "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Good." "Natalie, your tone is making this sound worse than it might be." "Mom, Malcolm gave you legal documents prepared through someone Trevor knows, pressured you to sign them, then got angry when you wanted independent advice. When you say it like that, how else should I say it?" I looked into my tea. "Your stepfather isn't a criminal. I didn't call him one. He's worried about Trevor. That doesn't make this normal." I sighed. I don't want to turn my marriage into a legal battle. Natalie reached across the table and took my hand. "Reading a document isn't declaring war." I looked at her. "Getting your own lawyer isn't betraying your husband either." "I know. Do you?" That question stung because I wasn't sure. Natalie squeezed my hand. "You spent your whole career telling people to read what they sign." She was right. At the hospital, I'd watched intelligent people sign documents they didn't understand because they were embarrassed to ask questions. I had always told them the same thing. Never let someone else's impatience become your emergency. Yet somehow inside my own marriage, I had almost forgotten that. "I'll find the original records," I said, "and you'll have someone review anything Malcolm asks you to sign." "Yes. Promise, I promise." Natalie stayed for dinner. Malcolm was polite but distant. I wondered whether he knew what we'd discussed. 2 days later, I found something that made the missing files seem almost insignificant. Malcolm had gone to meet a friend for lunch. I needed to pick up a prescription, and my car was nearly out of gas, so I decided to take his sedan. Malcolm and I had always used each other's cars. There was nothing unusual about it. I opened the passenger door to put my purse inside. A folder slid from beneath the seat. Papers scattered across the floor mat. I bent down annoyed and began gathering them. Then I saw our address. I froze. At the top of the page were the words, "Residential Property Valuation." My hands went cold. I sat in the passenger seat and read. It wasn't an old report. It had been prepared less than 2 weeks earlier. The document described the square footage, lot size, recent improvements, neighborhood comparisons, and estimated market value of our home, my home. The number at the bottom shocked me. The house was worth considerably more than I had realized. Richmond property values had risen over the years, but I'd never cared enough to calculate what that meant for us. Apparently, someone else had. I turned the page. There were photographs of the exterior, our porch, our driveway, the backyard. I stared at the picture of the dogwood tree my father had planted 50 years earlier. Seeing it inside a valuation report made me feel strangely violated. It had been reduced to landscaping. My father's porch was exterior living space. My mother's kitchen was updated interior square footage. The bedroom where Natalie had slept as a child was part of a projected sales price. I kept reading. Then I saw the contact information. Trevor Atwood. My breath caught. I checked it again. There was no mistake. Trevor's name was attached to the request. I sat there for several minutes. All those questions suddenly rearranged themselves in my mind. The mortgage, the property taxes, recent sales, downsizing, equity. This wasn't occupational curiosity. Trevor had been studying the house, and Malcolm knew. I heard a car outside and looked up. Malcolm was home early. His sedan door was open. The valuation report was still in my hands. For 1 second, I considered putting everything back, pretending I had never seen it, giving him another chance to tell me himself. Then I realized how many chances he'd already had. Malcolm came through the side gate carrying a small hardware store bag. He saw me sitting in his car. His expression changed immediately. Not confusion, recognition. He knew exactly what I was holding. Georgina. I stepped out. What is this? He looked at the report. Where did you find that? Under your passenger seat. You were going through my car, no. I was borrowing it. The folder fell out. He said nothing. I held up the report. Why did Trevor have our house valued? Malcolm looked toward the street as though hoping someone might interrupt us. No one did. It's just information. Information for what we were looking at options. He closed his eyes briefly. I felt something inside me tighten. Malcolm, look at me. He did. Are you planning to sell this house? No. The answer came quickly, but this time quick answers didn't comfort me. Then why was it valued? Because knowing what something is worth doesn't mean you're selling it. Does Trevor know what it's worth? Malcolm didn't answer. Does Trevor need money? Still nothing. I stepped closer. You told me his problems were his business. They are. Then why is my house in the middle of them? His jaw tightened. Our house. The correction should have comforted me. Instead, it chilled me. Because for the first time, the words our house didn't sound affectionate. They sounded like a claim. I looked down at the valuation report, at Trevor's name, at the number representing the price of 50 years of my memories. Then I looked back at my husband. I want the truth. Malcolm took a long breath. Come inside. No, Georgina. Tell me here. He glanced at the neighboring houses. I didn't care who heard. Finally, he said quietly, Trevor is having financial trouble. How much trouble? Serious. And you thought our house could solve it? His silence answered before he did. It might help. There it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not my imagination. A plan. Maybe not a completed one yet, but a plan that had progressed far enough for someone to photograph my home, calculate its value, and put Trevor's name on the report. I handed Malcolm the folder. No. He frowned. We haven't even discussed we're discussing it now. You don't know the situation. Then explain it. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something close to desperation in his face. It's complicated. No, Malcolm. I pointed toward the house behind us. That part isn't complicated. He followed my gaze. I thought about my father's hands repairing that porch, my mother's laughter in the kitchen, Natalie's childhood footsteps on the stairs, 38 years of marriage, all of it reduced to a number on a page. You should have talked to me before you let Trevor put a price on my home. Malcolm's eyes returned to mine. Our home, he corrected again. This time I didn't argue. But somewhere deep inside me, a warning had begun to sound. Because Malcolm wasn't defending our life together. He was preparing to tell me what he believed we owed his son. And I was beginning to understand that the house wasn't merely part of that conversation. It was the solution they had already chosen. Malcolm waited until we were inside before telling me how bad things really were. He closed the kitchen door behind us and placed the valuation report on the table between us. For several seconds, neither of us sat down. How serious? I asked. Malcolm rubbed both hands over his face. Serious enough. That isn't a number. It isn't that simple. It became simple the moment Trevor had my house valued. His eyes flickered at the word my. I noticed. This time he didn't correct me. Finally, Malcolm pulled out a chair. Sit down. I'd rather stand. Georgina. Talk. He looked exhausted. Trevor's development outside Fredericksburg is failing. I knew the project. Trevor had talked about it constantly the previous year. A planned development of upscale townhomes. He had called it the biggest opportunity of his career. What happened? Costs went up. Construction took longer than expected. A financing partner pulled out, and he borrowed to keep things moving. How much? Malcolm hesitated. More than he should have. That still isn't a number. I don't know the exact total. I didn't believe him. You know enough to have our house valued. His mouth tightened. There are loans coming due. When soon? How soon? Within weeks. I stared at him. So that was the pressure I had been sensing. Trevor wasn't casually considering possibilities. He was racing a clock. What happens if he can't pay? Malcolm looked away. He could lose the development, and possibly the business. And Malcolm's voice dropped. Some personal assets. I absorbed that. I wasn't happy Trevor was in trouble. Whatever tension existed between us, I had known him since he was 5 years old. But concern was different from responsibility. What exactly does this have to do with our house? Malcolm leaned forward. We have options. There was that word again. Options. I had learned that when someone wanted something from you, they often called their preferred choice an option. What options we could sell? He said it. Finally. No hints. No hypothetical downsizing. No questions about maintenance. Sell. I stared at him. You've already thought this through. I'm trying to solve a problem. Trevor's problem. Our son's problem. I caught the emphasis. Our son. Malcolm only used that phrase when he wanted to remind me that I had helped raise Trevor. Yes, I said. A 43-year-old man's business problem. He made mistakes. He certainly did. You don't have to sound so cold. I felt something sharp move through me. Cold. He could lose everything. And your solution is for me to lose my home. You wouldn't lose your home. What do you call selling it? We'd buy another one. I laughed once without humor. Malcolm continued. We don't need a place this large anymore. We could buy a condo outright somewhere nice and still have money left. For Trevor. To help Trevor. How much? Enough to stabilize things? I shook my head. You've calculated it. Roughly. So you've calculated the sale price, what we'd spend on a condo, and how much would remain? He didn't answer. You did all of that before talking to me. We were exploring possibilities. Malcolm looked toward the window. Trevor and I. I walked away from the table. That hurt more than I expected. Not the financial proposal, the partnership. My husband and his son had been discussing the future of the home where I had spent most of my life, and I had been treated like the obstacle they would address after the plan was ready. No. Malcolm looked up. Can you at least hear me out? I did. You haven't heard the whole proposal. I don't need the whole proposal. Georgina, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. The answer is no. His chair scraped backward. Do you understand what could happen to Trevor? Yes. No, I don't think you do. And do you understand what you're asking of me? We would still have a home. That isn't the point. Then what is? I looked at him. This house was my parents' home. It became ours because I chose to build a life with you here. That doesn't make it a rescue fund every time someone in this family makes a bad investment. The kitchen door opened. Trevor walked in. I hadn't heard his car. The fact that he arrived at that exact moment told me Malcolm had expected him. Another detail nobody had mentioned to me. Trevor looked from his father to me. So he told you. I folded my arms. He finally did. Trevor put his keys on the counter. Then you know what's happening. I know enough. He took a breath. Georgina, I'm not asking you to give me the house. That's comforting. I'm asking for help. You've been asking questions about this property for weeks without telling me why. I didn't want to involve you until I knew what was necessary. I almost laughed. You didn't want to involve the woman who lives in the house you planned to sell, Malcolm interrupted. No one planned anything. I pointed toward the valuation report. That document says otherwise. Trevor pulled out a chair. Can we stop treating this like some conspiracy? You had my house professionally valued without telling me. Because I needed numbers. for what to understand what was possible. With my property. Trevor's expression hardened. With family property. There it was. The language had changed again. My house. Our house. Family property. Each version seemed designed to move me farther away from having a say. Trevor leaned toward me. I've spent 15 years building my company, and I hope you find a way to save it. I can save it, then do that. I need time. Ask your lenders. I have. Sell something else. I am. Find another investor. I'm trying. Then keep trying. His jaw tightened. You're sitting on an asset worth more than you need. The room went silent. Malcolm said Trevor, but I held up my hand. No, let him finish. Trevor realized he'd gone too far. Still, he continued. I'm saying there is value here that could solve a real problem. This isn't unused money in a drawer. No one said it was. You just called my home an asset worth more than I need. You're 67 years old, Georgina. You and Dad don't need 3 bedrooms and a yard this size. Something inside me became very calm. Who decides what I need? He opened his mouth. I didn't let him answer. You know. Your father. That's not what I meant. Then who? Trevor looked at Malcolm. That glance told me more than any answer. Malcolm stepped between us emotionally, if not physically. Family helps family. I turned toward him. That's what families do. I looked at the man I had loved for 38 years. Yes, families help. Then why won't you? Because help has limits. Not when your son is about to lose everything. Your son made business decisions. I didn't. He's your family too. I know exactly who Trevor is to me. Trevor pushed back his chair. Apparently not. I looked at him. Be careful. He stared back. You've always said you loved me like family. I do. Then prove it. That hurt. And because it hurt, I understood exactly what he was doing. I spoke slowly. When you were 14 and broke your arm, I sat beside you in the emergency room until sunrise. When you graduated college, I helped your father pay what your scholarship didn't cover. When your first marriage ended, you stayed in this house for 3 months. Trevor's eyes shifted. So don't stand in my kitchen and tell me I need to prove that you're family. I didn't mean, yes, you did. I looked at both men. Somewhere along the way, the two of you decided that loving Trevor means protecting him from every consequence. Malcolm's face reddened. He could lose his livelihood. And if we drain our retirement security to save him, what happens the next time? This isn't about draining anything. You want to sell my home. Our home, Malcolm snapped. I turned to him. Then why wasn't I part of the decision? He had no answer. That silence was the answer. Trevor stood. Dad, this is going nowhere. I looked at him. You're right. He picked up his keys. At the doorway, he turned back. You know what I don't understand? You'd still have hundreds of thousands left. You'd still have a beautiful place to live. You wouldn't actually be giving up anything you need. I felt my throat tighten. That's because you think value is the same thing as price. He frowned. I continued. This house contains things no appraisal can measure. Trevor shook his head. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. No. I looked directly at him. But your bills don't get to erase my sentiment either. He left. The door slammed behind him. Malcolm remained at the table. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, I wish you could understand how scared I am for him. I softened despite everything. I do understand. Then help me. I can help without destroying my own security. He shook his head. You keep calling it your security like I'm trying to take something from you. I stared at him. Aren't you? His face changed. That was the moment I knew. Malcolm wasn't merely asking anymore. Somewhere between Trevor's debts and that valuation report, my husband had convinced himself that my refusal was unreasonable. And once someone decides your no shouldn't count, they stop asking permission. They start looking for a way around it. After the argument with Trevor, something strange happened. Malcolm stopped asking me to sell the house. No more condominium brochures appeared on the kitchen counter. No more conversations about maintenance, property taxes, or how much easier our lives might be somewhere smaller. Trevor stopped visiting on Sundays. For nearly 2 weeks, the subject disappeared completely. At first, I thought my refusal had finally been heard. I wanted to believe Malcolm had gone away, considered what I'd said, and realized how badly he'd crossed a line. One evening, he even brought home Chinese food from my favorite restaurant. We ate in front of the television like we had hundreds of times before. He asked about Natalie. I asked whether his knee was still bothering him. For 90 minutes we were Georgina and Malcolm again. Not two people fighting over property, just husband and wife. That normalcy was so comforting that I nearly ignored what happened the next morning. I tried to log into one of our joint investment accounts. The password didn't work. I tried again. Nothing. I clicked the reset option. The security notice said account credentials had recently been updated. Malcolm. He was upstairs. What? Did you change the investment password? A pause. Then footsteps. He appeared at the top of the stairs. Yes. Why security? What security? I got one of those suspicious emails. What email? Something about account verification. I stared up at him. So you changed the password? Yes. And didn't tell me. I forgot. I waited. What's the new one? Another pause. I'll write it down. Tell me now. He frowned. Why are you making this into something? I logged into our account and discovered I couldn't access it. You can access it, not without the password. I said I'll give it to you. I held his gaze. Eventually, he came downstairs, opened the drawer beside the refrigerator, and wrote the new password on a notepad. I tested it. It worked. Nothing appeared missing. I almost felt foolish. Almost. But the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Something changed. I discovered it. Malcolm explained afterward. That wasn't communication, it was damage control. A few days later, I saw him standing at the far end of the backyard, talking on his phone. There was nothing unusual about making a call outside. Except it was raining. Not heavily, but enough that Malcolm normally would have complained about his shoes getting wet. I watched from the kitchen window. He kept his back toward the house. Then he turned slightly, and I could see the tension in his face. I opened the back door. Malcolm. He looked over his shoulder. I'll call you back, he said quickly into the phone. Then he ended the call. Who was that, Trevor? What did he want? Nothing important. You're standing in the rain to discuss nothing important. Malcolm glanced upward, as if he'd only just noticed the weather. He's stressed. So am I. He walked toward the house. I stepped aside. Is he still trying to sell the house? Malcolm stopped. Nobody is trying to sell anything. Then why won't he come inside anymore? Because the last time he was here, you practically threw him out. I told a 43-year-old man he couldn't demand my house to save his company. He didn't demand it. We remember that conversation differently. Malcolm shook his head and went upstairs. Again, the conversation ended because he decided it had. 3 days later, the phone rang shortly before noon. I answered. Hello, a woman's voice said. May I speak with Malcolm Atwood? He's not home. Can I take a message? There was a slight hesitation. This is Claire from Richmond Heritage Realty. I'm following up regarding... She stopped. Regarding what? Another pause. I can call Mr. Atwood directly. Regarding what? I'm sorry. I must have the wrong number. The call ended. I stood in the kitchen holding the receiver. Richmond Heritage Realty. I wrote the name down. When Malcolm came home, I asked him. He barely reacted. Probably Trevor. She asked for you. He may have given her my number. Why would a realtor be calling you? I don't know. Call her. What? Call her back? Malcolm stared at me. Georgina, I'm not playing detective with you. Neither am I. Then stop treating every phone call like evidence. Evidence. He had chosen that word, not me. That night I called Natalie. Something's wrong, I said. What happened? I told her about the password, the calls, the realtor. Natalie didn't hesitate. Mom, call a lawyer. I don't know what I'd even say. Say exactly what you just told me. I want to know what Malcolm thinks he can do first. Why? Because if I go to a lawyer now, he'll say I never trusted him. Natalie sighed. Mom, this stopped being about trust when he started hiding things. I know. Do you... I didn't answer. She softened. Please protect yourself. I will. Promise yes. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to understand what Malcolm believed gave him the right to keep moving forward after I had clearly said no. The answer appeared the following morning. I went into the small home office to print a recipe Natalie had emailed me. The printer was out of paper. I opened the tray, filled it, and pressed resume. A page emerged. Not my recipe. At the top was our address. Below it was a photograph of the front of our house. For a moment, I thought it was another valuation document. Then I read the first sentence. Beautifully maintained Richmond residence, offering timeless character on a spacious established lot. My hands began to tremble. I kept reading. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, updated kitchen, mature landscaping, desirable neighborhood, flexible closing timeline. Then the phrase that made something inside me crack. Motivated sellers. Sellers, plural. I read it again. Motivated sellers. Someone had written a listing description for my home. Not a valuation, not an estimate, a listing. I heard Malcolm behind me. What are you doing? I turned. The page was still in my hand. His eyes immediately dropped to it. You tell me. His face changed. Where did you get that? The printer. He stepped forward. Give it to me. I pulled it back. No. It's a draft. A draft for what you know what. I want to hear you say it. He exhaled. Trevor asked someone to put together marketing language. For the house I already said I would not sell. No one has listed anything. Then why does this exist? Because we need to know our options. I laughed bitterly. There are those options again. Georgina, no. You listened to me say no. Then you continued anyway. We're gathering information. You've gathered a valuation. You've spoken to a realtor. Now you have a listing description. Nothing has been signed. Yet, he looked away. That one movement frightened me more than shouting would have. I stepped closer. Are you waiting for me to change my mind? He said nothing. Or are you looking for a way to do this without me? His head snapped toward me. That's ridiculous. Then answer. I don't have to defend every conversation I have with my son. When those conversations involve selling the roof over my head, yes, Malcolm, you do. His voice hardened. You keep saying my house, my home, my decision. Because apparently, someone needs to remind you that I have a decision. I live here too. I never said you didn't. I've paid taxes here, repairs, renovations, 38 years of expenses. I know. Then stop talking like I'm a guest. I stared at him. That was when I understood something had shifted. Malcolm wasn't merely arguing that selling would be wise. He was beginning to argue that he had earned authority over the house. I looked down at the listing description. Motivated sellers. There were 2 words on that page that told me everything. They had stopped asking whether I wanted to sell. Now they were speaking as if I already had. I folded the page once and put it in my purse. Malcolm frowned. What are you doing with that? Keeping it? For what I met his eyes. I don't know yet. That afternoon I sat alone on the front porch. The dogwood branches moved gently above the lawn. My father's porch boards creaked beneath my chair. For most of my life that sound had meant home. Now I found myself wondering how long it would be before a stranger stood there, imagining where to put their furniture. Then another thought came, a colder one. What exactly did Malcolm believe gave him the right to sell this place without me? Natalie wanted me to call a lawyer. I wasn't ready to do that, but I was ready to stop assuming my husband was simply confused. I needed to know what he thought he knew, because whatever Malcolm and Trevor were doing, they were no longer trying to convince me. They were preparing to prove that my permission didn't matter. 3 nights after I found the draft listing, Malcolm asked me to come into the dining room. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. Trevor's car was already parked outside. I stood in the hallway for a moment looking at the 2 men through the doorway. Malcolm sat at one end of the table. Trevor sat beside him. Not across from him. Beside him. That detail stayed with me. There was a thick folder on the table between them. I walked in and pulled out the chair opposite Malcolm. So I said, "What are we doing?" Malcolm placed both hands on the folder. "We need to settle this. Settle what? The house. I looked at Trevor. Why is he here? Trevor shifted. Because this affects me. No, your financial problems affect you. My home affects me. Malcolm's face tightened. Can we please get through one conversation without turning it into a fight? I haven't raised my voice. You don't have to. I almost smiled at the irony. For weeks I had been told I was emotional, suspicious, difficult, and uncooperative, while I was the only person at that table who hadn't secretly arranged an appraisal or spoken to a realtor. All right, I said. Talk. Malcolm opened the folder. Inside were documents I recognized. Some were copies of papers we had signed over the years. Banking authorizations, beneficiary updates, financial agreements, and estate planning documents. Others were unfamiliar. Malcolm pulled out several pages. I've been reviewing our records. With whom? He ignored the question. Over the years, we've combined nearly everything. Bank accounts, yes. Investments, some. Household expenses, obviously. Taxes. I waited. Malcolm leaned back. For 38 years, I've paid into this home. I've never denied that. Repairs, insurance, improvements, taxes. Yes. The roof. Yes. The furnace. Yes, Malcolm. The basement renovation. I remember. I was married to you for all of it. Trevor exhaled impatiently. His father glanced at him. I noticed. They had rehearsed this. Maybe not word for word, but they had discussed how this conversation would go. Malcolm slid a document toward me. These papers establish that I've had authority over shared financial matters for years. I looked at it. It was one of the documents I'd signed long ago when we reorganized several accounts. This is financial authorization. It shows we've operated jointly. It shows you can handle certain financial matters. Exactly. No. Not exactly. Trevor leaned forward. Georgina, you're getting hung up on technical language. I looked at him. You're a real estate developer, not my attorney. I understand property. Then you should understand why I want an attorney. Malcolm interrupted. This isn't about attorneys. You put legal documents on my dining table. It became about attorneys. He rubbed his forehead. You're missing the point. Then make it. Malcolm's expression hardened. The point is that you keep talking as though I have no standing here. I've never said that. You keep calling it your house. It came from my family. And I've lived here 38 years. Yes, I've invested in it. Yes, I've maintained it. Yes. Then stop treating me like a tenant. The accusation shocked me. Malcolm, when have I ever treated you like a tenant? He didn't answer. I looked at Trevor. Did you tell him that? Trevor's eyebrows rose. Tell him what? That I'm treating him like a guest in his own home. I didn't have to. It's obvious. I turned back to Malcolm. There was something almost heartbreaking about seeing my husband sitting beside his son repeating an argument that sounded less like the man I'd known and more like a justification someone had carefully built for him. Malcolm, I said quietly, I have never once told you this wasn't your home. Until now. No. I told you it wasn't Trevor's emergency fund. Trevor pushed his chair back slightly. Here we go again. Yes, Trevor. Here we go again, because your debts are the only reason we're having this conversation. My debts are temporary, then solve them temporarily. I am trying, with my house, with an asset that could solve the problem without hurting anyone. I stared at him. You still don't understand. Understand what that selling something I don't want to sell is hurting me. He looked frustrated. You'd move somewhere nicer. I don't want somewhere nicer. Smaller, easier, I don't want easier. Why? The question came out almost angrily. I looked at him for several seconds. Because I am allowed to want what I already have. That silenced him. Malcolm closed the folder. Enough. His voice had changed. There was no pleading in it anymore. No attempt to persuade me. Just exhaustion and something colder. I've tried to explain this reasonably. So have I. No, Georgina. You've decided your feelings settle the entire issue. My consent settles whether I agree to sell. You keep assuming your consent is the only one that matters. I felt something shift inside me. What does that mean? Malcolm looked down at the documents, then at me. I've spoken to people. What people who understand these things. Names, that isn't important. It is to me. Trevor leaned toward his father. Dad, just tell her. I looked between them. Tell me what. Malcolm's jaw tightened. He pulled another group of papers from the folder and pushed them toward me. You've signed documents over the years giving me authority to manage shared financial matters. I know what I've signed. Do you? His tone made my stomach tighten. I looked at the papers. Some signatures were mine. Some dated back more than 20 years. You're telling me these give you the right to sell this house? I'm telling you the situation isn't as simple as you keep pretending. Then explain it simply. Malcolm stood. So much of our financial life is combined that you can't suddenly decide everything connected to this property belongs exclusively to you. I never said everything belongs exclusively to me. You keep saying your house. Because it was my family's house before you ever lived here. And after 38 years of marriage, you think that means nothing changed. His voice was louder now. I stood too. What exactly are you claiming? Trevor remained seated watching us. Malcolm pointed at the folder. We built a life together. I contributed to this property. We handled our finances jointly. You signed authority documents. You can't suddenly wave your father's memory around and act like I have no rights. My father's memory, I could feel my hands beginning to shake. Is that what you think this is? I think you're being sentimental when we need to be practical. Practical for whom? For this family. No, for Trevor. Trevor stood. This is going nowhere. I turned toward him. You're right. So let me make it very clear. I am not selling this house to cover your business debts. Malcolm's face went still. Maybe it isn't entirely your decision. The room became silent. I looked at him. Say that again. He didn't. I stepped closer. Malcolm, say it again. He looked directly into my eyes. You heard me. No. I want to know exactly what you're telling your wife. His voice dropped. You keep acting like the house is solely yours. It came from my parents, and we've been married 38 years. That doesn't answer me. He looked at Trevor. Trevor gave the smallest nod. I saw it. And Malcolm saw me see it. Something hardened in his expression. He placed his palm flat against the folder. This house isn't yours anymore. For a second, I genuinely couldn't breathe. Not because I understood the legal meaning. I didn't. Not yet. But I understood the emotional meaning perfectly. The man I'd shared my bed with for 38 years had just told me that the place where my mother had cooked Sunday dinners, where my father had repaired porch boards, where I'd raised my daughter, and where Malcolm himself had promised to grow old beside me, was no longer mine. I looked around the dining room, at the old molding my father had installed, at the china cabinet Malcolm and I bought on our 10th anniversary, at the faint scratch on the floor from Natalie's high school graduation party. Then I looked back at my husband. Are you absolutely sure? Malcolm seemed surprised by my calm. Yes. About what these papers mean? Yes. About your authority? Yes. And you've had an estate attorney review the original property records? He hesitated. Only briefly. But I saw it. Trevor answered instead. We've reviewed what matters. I kept my eyes on Malcolm. That wasn't my question. Malcolm's frustration returned. I don't need another lawyer to tell me what I already know. Something about those words settled me. Until that moment I had been hurt. Now I became curious. Because Malcolm had spent weeks gathering documents about our finances. Trevor had ordered a valuation. They had spoken to a realtor. They had prepared a listing. Yet when I mentioned the original property records, neither man could tell me that an estate attorney had reviewed them. I reached for the folder. Malcolm put his hand over it. What are you doing? I want copies. Why? Because if these papers prove what you say, they prove there shouldn't be any problem with someone else reading them. Trevor shook his head. You're wasting time. Then it will be my time to waste. Malcolm stared at me. For once I didn't try to soften my expression. Give me copies. After a long silence, he removed his hand. I took the documents. Then I walked out of the dining room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry until I reached the upstairs bathroom and locked it behind me. I sat on the edge of the bathtub with both hands pressed over my mouth. 38 years. That number kept repeating in my head. 38 years of saying our marriage, our family, our retirement, our home. And now because I had said no to Trevor. Malcolm had reached backward through those years and turned every shared expense into evidence against me. That night, Malcolm slept in the guest room. I stayed awake in our bedroom. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and walked downstairs. The house was dark. I entered the small study that had once belonged to my father. His old oak desk was still against the wall. I ran my fingers across its worn edge. And suddenly, for reasons I couldn't explain, I remembered something. An office. A much younger version of myself. My father sitting beside me. A lawyer across the desk. And papers. Old papers. Property papers. I couldn't remember exactly what they said, but I remembered my father telling me there were some documents a woman should never lose track of. I stood alone in the darkness. Then I whispered the first name that came back to me. Howard. Howard Bennett. My father's attorney. For the first time since Malcolm told me the house was no longer mine, I felt something other than fear. I felt direction. I didn't call Howard Bennett that night. I wanted to. I stood in my father's old study with my phone in my hand, staring at the dark window, while Malcolm slept down the hall in the guest room. But it was after 2 in the morning. And more importantly, I wasn't entirely certain Howard was still practicing law. The last time I remembered seeing him, his hair had been brown. Mine had too. I sat at my father's desk and tried to reconstruct a memory I hadn't touched in decades. Howard Bennett. My father. An office somewhere in downtown Richmond. Documents spread across a polished table. I closed my eyes. Slowly pieces returned. I had been newly married to Malcolm. Natalie and Trevor were still children. Dad had called me one afternoon and asked me to meet him at Howard's office. I remembered being irritated because I had needed to leave work early. "What is this about?" I'd asked him. "Paperwork. That's not an answer. It is when you're my age." I could almost hear him saying it. Dad had always believed important things should be handled before they became emergencies. I had inherited his filing habits. Apparently, I hadn't inherited his patience for legal documents. That afternoon, Howard had explained something about property. I remembered nodding, signing where I was told, then asking whether we were finished because I needed to pick Natalie up. How strange that something I'd considered so unimportant then now seemed capable of changing everything. But there was one memory I could hear clearly. Dad and I had been walking toward the parking lot after the meeting. He stopped beside my car. "Georgie." I turned. He looked unusually serious. "If anyone ever makes you feel like you need permission to stay in your own home, you call Howard." I laughed. "Dad, Malcolm isn't going to throw me out." "I didn't say Malcolm." "Then who? Nobody, I hope." He put his hand on my shoulder. "But life is long. People change. Circumstances change. That's cheerful. I'm not trying to scare you. You're doing a wonderful job." He smiled. Then he said something I hadn't remembered until that night. "Protection isn't an accusation. It's preparation." At the time, I thought he was being overprotective. Walter Mercer had lived through the Depression's aftermath, military service layoffs, medical bills, and the death of his wife. He trusted people. He simply trusted paperwork more. Sitting at his desk, decades later, I finally understood the difference. The next morning, Malcolm was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He looked terrible. So did I, probably. There were 2 cups of coffee on the table. One was mine. For a moment, that nearly broke me. Even after everything, he had remembered exactly how I took it. A little milk. No sugar. 38 years of marriage lived in details like that. "Morning," he said. "Morning." I sat down. Neither of us mentioned the previous night. Finally, Malcolm said, "I don't like where this is going." I looked at him. "Neither do I. We shouldn't be fighting like this." "I agree." His expression softened slightly. "Then maybe we can start over." "What does starting over mean?" "We talk without accusations." "All right. And you consider what I'm saying." "I already have." His face tightened. There it was. Starting over meant reaching a different answer. I need time, I said. How much I don't know. Trevor doesn't have unlimited time. I almost laughed. Even our reconciliation had a deadline determined by Trevor's creditors. I wasn't talking about Trevor. Malcolm stood. Of course not. He carried his mug to the sink. I watched him. Malcolm. What do you remember? Howard Bennett. His back remained toward me. Your father's lawyer. So he remembered. Yes. What about him? I was thinking about Dad last night. Malcolm turned. There was a flicker in his expression. Concern, perhaps. Why? Because this was his house once. I know that. He handled the original property arrangements. Malcolm dried his hands. Georgina, your father has been gone a long time. That doesn't make his documents disappear. His face hardened. You're doing it again. Doing what, trying to turn this into your father versus me. No. I'm trying to understand what belongs to whom. I showed you the documents. You showed me financial documents. They matter. Maybe. His eyes narrowed. What are you planning? The question surprised me. Planning. Are you going to a lawyer? I studied him. Would that be a problem? He didn't answer directly. I think bringing lawyers into a marriage is a mistake. I felt something inside me settle. Then perhaps legal papers shouldn't have been used to tell me my house wasn't mine. Malcolm picked up his keys. I can't do this right now. He left. I waited until his car disappeared. Then I called Natalie. I need you to find someone for me. Who? An attorney named Howard Bennett. There was a pause. Your lawyer. My father's. Mom, how long ago? Long enough that he may be retired. Natalie was already typing. Richmond, yes. What kind of law? Estate planning, I think. A few seconds passed. Then Natalie said, I found a Howard J. Bennett. My heart jumped. Where? Bennett and Cole Estate Law. Downtown Richmond. Is there a picture? Yes. And he looks about 60. I smiled despite myself. That could be him. Do you want the number? I wrote it down. Natalie hesitated. Mom. Yes, are you okay? I looked around the kitchen. The room suddenly felt different. Not because anything physical had changed, because for the first time I was about to ask someone outside my marriage what my husband could legally do to me. No, I said. It was the first time I'd admitted it, but I think I'm about to find out whether I need to be. After we hung up, I stared at Howard's number for several minutes. Then I dialed. A receptionist answered. Bennett and Cole Estate Law. My name is Georgina Atwood. I'd like to speak with Howard Bennett. May I ask what this concerns? An old property matter. Are you an existing client? I don't know if I still count as one. She laughed politely. Has Mr. Bennett represented you before? He represented my father, Walter Mercer. The line went quiet for a moment. May I place you on hold? Yes. Soft music began playing. My heart was beating ridiculously fast. After perhaps 2 minutes, the music stopped. A man's voice came on. This is Howard Bennett. I swallowed. Mr. Bennett, you probably don't remember me. Try me. My name is Georgina Atwood. Georgina Mercer before I married. Silence. I wondered if the call had dropped. Then he spoke. Georgina Mercer Atwood. Yes. Another pause. I wondered if this day would ever come. My fingers tightened around the phone. What day? Howard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, Is this about the house on Hawthorne Avenue? I stopped breathing for a second. Yes. Is someone trying to sell it? My mouth went dry. My husband says I may not have the right to stop him. Howard became very quiet. Who told him that he believes documents? I've signed over the years give him authority. What documents? I have copies. Good. His tone changed completely. Professional now. Focused. Bring them when my office can make room tomorrow morning. I looked toward the hallway. Mr. Bennett, there's something else. Yes. My father once told me to call you if anyone ever made me feel like I needed permission to stay in my own home. Howard exhaled slowly. I remember. You remember him saying that? I remember why he said it. A chill moved over my arms. What did my father do? Howard paused. Georgina. I don't want to explain 30-year-old property documents from memory. Are they still there? Yes. My eyes filled with tears. You kept them. Your father made certain we would. I sat down. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground beneath me become solid. Not safe. Not yet. But solid. Howard continued. Bring every document Malcolm showed you. Don't sign anything else. And don't agree to sell anything before we talk. I won't. One more thing. Don't tell me what Malcolm thinks the papers mean. I frowned. Why? Because I want to read exactly what he's relying on. I looked toward the front door Malcolm had walked through minutes earlier. All right. Howard's voice softened. And Georgina. Yes, your father was a very careful man. After the call ended, I remained at the kitchen table. My father's words returned one more time. Protection isn't an accusation. It's preparation. For nearly 40 years, I had believed Walter Mercer was simply a cautious father worried about a future that would never come. Now I wasn't so sure. Because Howard Bennett hadn't sounded surprised that I called. He sounded as though he'd been waiting. Howard Bennett's office was on the third floor of an old brick building in downtown Richmond. The moment I stepped inside the lobby, something stirred in my memory. The polished brass directory, the marble floor, the elevator that shuddered slightly before the doors opened. I had been there before, not recently, not even within the last 20 years, but I remembered. When I reached Howard's office, a receptionist led me into a conference room. I was still taking off my coat when the door opened. Howard walked in carrying a legal pad. He was older, of course. His hair was almost completely gray, and there were deep lines around his eyes. But I recognized him immediately. He stopped when he saw me. Georgina. Howard. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled. You look like Eleanor. The mention of my mother nearly undid me. I've been hearing that more often lately. It's a compliment. I know. He shook my hand, then glanced at the folder I was holding. Is that what Malcolm gave you? Yes. His expression became serious. Let's see it. We sat across from each other. I handed him the folder. Howard opened it and began reading. I had expected conversation. Instead, silence filled the room. He examined every page. Not quickly, not casually. He occasionally made a note. Once he removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and returned to the first page. I watched his face for clues. Is it bad? He held up one finger. Let me finish. So I waited. 20 minutes felt like 2 hours. Finally, Howard closed the folder. All right. My hands tightened in my lap. Can Malcolm sell the house? Howard didn't answer. Instead, he asked, Do you know what these documents are? Some of them. Tell me what you think they are. I explained the joint financial authorizations, beneficiary documents, and older agreements Malcolm had shown me. Howard nodded. Most of that is accurate. My stomach dropped. So Malcolm is right, I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? I'm saying these documents establish certain financial arrangements between you and your husband. Some authorize him to act regarding particular jointly managed assets. Some concern accounts. Some are routine estate planning documents. He tapped the folder. But Malcolm appears to be making a very large assumption. What assumption that authority over certain financial matters automatically gives him authority over the property on Hawthorne Avenue? I leaned forward. Doesn't it? Howard looked directly at me. Not necessarily. Those 2 words were the first real relief I'd felt in weeks. But Howard wasn't finished. Georgina, I need to ask you something. All right. Has Malcolm ever seen the original property trust? I stared at him. The what? Howard's expression changed. The property trust. I don't know what you're talking about. He sat back. You genuinely don't remember. I remember coming here with Dad. I remember signing papers. I remember him telling me to call you if I ever had trouble with the house. But you don't remember the trust, no. Howard was quiet. Then he stood. Wait here. Howard. He stopped. What exactly did my father do? I'd rather show you. He left the conference room. I sat alone. Property trust. I searched my memory. Nothing. I remembered my father discussing taxes, insurance, repairs, but not a trust. 5 minutes later, Howard returned carrying an old file box. Not a modern cardboard storage box. An actual archival file case with metal corners and a faded label. He placed it on the table. My heart began beating faster. Written across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately were 2 words. Walter Mercer. I touched the label. That's his handwriting. I know. Howard sat down. Your father was one of the most meticulous clients I've ever represented. I smiled faintly. That sounds like him. He asked questions most clients never think to ask. What kind? What happens if circumstances change? What happens if Georgina remarries? What happens if she becomes financially vulnerable? What happens if someone pressures her? I looked up. He thought Malcolm would do this. No. Howard answered immediately. Your father wasn't trying to protect you from Malcolm specifically. Then why he was trying to protect you from uncertainty? That sounded exactly like Dad. Howard opened the file case. Inside were folders, correspondence, and several documents with aging cream-colored pages. I reached toward them. Howard gently stopped me. Before we go further, I want to be careful. Why? Because I don't want to give you a dramatic answer when what you need is an accurate one. I sat back. Howard pulled one folder forward. Your parents made arrangements concerning the house before your marriage to Malcolm. What arrangements? A legal structure concerning ownership and your interest in the property. The trust. Yes. I stared at the folder. Why don't I remember this? You were young, newly married, raising children, working full-time. That sounds like an excuse. It sounds like life. I looked down. I signed something, yes. What? Howard paused. Documents acknowledging the arrangement and your position within it. Does Malcolm know? I can't tell you what Malcolm knows. But was he involved not in establishing the original structure? My pulse quickened. Then tell me what it says. Howard didn't immediately answer. Please. He looked at me for several seconds. Then he closed the file. I couldn't believe it. Howard, I want Malcolm here. What? And anyone directly involved in his plan to sell the house. Trevor. If Trevor is asserting an interest or influencing the proposed transaction, yes. I shook my head. I came here for an answer. And you'll get one. Then give it to me. Howard folded his hands. Georgina, your husband has already told you that these documents he touched Malcolm's folder give him authority over the house. Yes. If I explain your father's documents privately, Malcolm can later claim you misunderstood me, selectively repeated what I said, or withheld something. So I would prefer to explain the relevant documents once clearly with everyone present. I looked at the old file. Is that necessary? No. Then why? Because sometimes the cleanest way to end a dispute is to remove everyone's ability to rewrite what happened. That sentence stayed with me. Howard pushed Malcolm's folder back toward me. Until then, don't sign anything. I won't. Don't agree to a listing. I won't. Don't sign a purchase agreement, deed financing document, or anything presented as routine. I understand. He nodded. Good. I touched my father's file again. Can you at least tell me one thing? What was Dad worried I would lose the house? Howard's expression softened. Your father worried about you losing choices. I felt my throat tighten. There's a difference, a very important one. He leaned back. Walter understood that people don't always lose property because someone steals it. Sometimes they lose it because they're pressured. Sometimes because they're frightened. Sometimes because someone they love convinces them they don't have the right to say no. I couldn't speak. Malcolm's voice returned in my mind. This house isn't yours anymore. Howard continued quietly. Your father wanted your choices protected. I looked toward the window. Richmond moved below U.S. cars, pedestrians, ordinary people living ordinary lives. 38 years earlier, my father had sat somewhere in that same building and worried about a future I had been too busy to imagine. I want the meeting, I said. Howard nodded. I'll arrange it. With Malcolm. Yes. And Trevor. If he's part of this. He is. Anyone else? I thought about Natalie. She had been the first person to tell me that reading a document wasn't betrayal. My daughter. Howard nodded. Bring her. I stood, but before leaving, I looked once more at the Mercer file. Howard. Yes. When you asked whether Malcolm had seen the original property trust, you sounded surprised. I was. Why? He considered his answer. Because anyone making a confident claim about ownership of that house should have started there. A chill moved through me. And Malcolm didn't. Apparently not. I picked up my folder. At the door, I stopped. What happens if he refuses to come? Howard glanced at my father's file. Then I'll explain it to you without him. I nodded. But I think he'll come. Why? Because Malcolm believes he's right. Howard gave me a long, unreadable look. That he said quietly may be exactly why he should hear this in person. I walked out carrying the same documents I'd brought in. Nothing visible had changed. I still didn't know exactly what my father's trust said. I still didn't know whether my marriage would survive. But one thing had changed. For weeks, Malcolm and Trevor had been holding papers in front of me, as though the existence of a signature meant the argument was over. Now I knew there was another document, an older one. A document Malcolm apparently hadn't read. And for the first time I wondered whether the folder he'd used to frighten me might not be the most important folder in the room. Malcolm did not take the news about Howard Bennett well. I waited until after dinner to tell him. He was standing at the kitchen counter rinsing his plate when I said I met with Howard today. His hands stopped beneath the running water. For a moment he didn't turn around. Then he shut off the faucet. Howard Bennett. Yes. My God, Georgina. There was no surprise in his voice. Only anger. You actually went to a lawyer. You gave me legal documents and told me they proved I no longer controlled my own home. What did you expect me to do? Talk to me. I've been trying to talk to you for weeks. He turned. No, you've been building a case against me. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't order a valuation behind your back. His jaw tightened. I didn't contact a realtor. Georgina. I didn't draft a listing for a house you had already refused to sell. Nothing was listed. And I didn't put legal papers on the dining table and tell my spouse the house wasn't theirs anymore. That stopped him. For a few seconds, the only sound in the kitchen was the refrigerator humming. Then Malcolm asked, What did Howard say? He wants to meet with us. Us, you and me. I paused. And Trevor. Malcolm gave a bitter laugh. Of course. He's part of this. He's my son. And his financial crisis is the reason we're discussing selling the house. Malcolm picked up a dish towel. So what is this? Some kind of ambush, no. It sounds like one. Howard wants everyone to hear the same explanation at the same time. Explanation of what the original property documents. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. What original property documents? The ones my father arranged. His expression shifted. It was subtle, but I saw it. For all Malcolm's confidence, he didn't know what I was talking about. What did Howard tell you? Not enough. Meaning, I wants to explain it with everyone present. Malcolm shook his head. This is ridiculous. Then come prove him wrong. He stared at me. I hadn't planned to say it that way. But once I did, I knew it was exactly the right thing to say. Malcolm had spent weeks telling me he knew what the papers meant. If he truly believed that there was no reason to fear Howard. I'll think about it, he said. No. His eyebrows rose. No, we have spent weeks working around Trevor's deadlines. I am done waiting while the two of you decide what happens next. His expression hardened. You don't dictate to me, and you don't dictate whether I keep my home. I walked away before the argument could become another circle. The next morning, Malcolm told me he would attend. Trevor called me that afternoon. That alone surprised me. He hadn't called directly since our argument. Dad says you're dragging us to some attorney's office. I'm not dragging anyone. Who is this guy? My father's estate attorney. And what exactly does he have to do with Dad? The meeting isn't about your father. Then why does he have to go? Because Malcolm claims he has authority over the house. Trevor sighed. This is wasting time we don't have. There it was again. Time. What happens when your time runs out? Trevor silence. What aren't you telling me? Nothing. Then answer. He exhaled. My lenders are putting pressure on me. I know. You don't know everything. No, because every time I ask you, tell me it's complicated. It is complicated. Try simplifying it. Another silence. Then Trevor said, if I can't satisfy certain obligations, soon, things start collapsing. What things? The development. Credit lines. Other loans. How soon, Georgina? How soon? Less than a month. I sat down. And the house? What about it? You expected money from the house before then. I expected Dad to help me find a solution. That isn't what I asked. Trevor didn't respond. Something about his silence made me push harder. Have you told anyone you're getting money from this house number too fast? Trevor. I said no. You're lying. His voice sharpened. You don't get to accuse me of lying. I just did. He went quiet. Then he said, I told some people there might be family funds available. My stomach tightened. What people? Creditors? I closed my eyes. How much did you tell them? I didn't give anyone an exact figure. What did you promise? I didn't promise anything. You told creditors family funds were coming. I said I had access to a possible family property sale. I stood so quickly my chair scraped backward. A possible what? Georgina, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. It wasn't a contract. You told people you might pay them with money from selling my house before I ever agreed to sell it. I believed Dad could work something out. With me, silence. Or around me. That isn't fair. Neither is spending money that doesn't belong to you. I haven't spent anything. You've already assigned it a purpose. He exhaled hard. I'm trying to save 15 years of work. And you've decided my home is the bridge that gets you there. You would still be financially secure. You don't get to make that calculation. Why are you determined to watch me lose everything? The question was so manipulative that for a moment I couldn't answer. Then I said quietly, why are you determined to make me responsible for preventing it? Trevor had no answer. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. Now I understood the urgency. Trevor hadn't merely hoped the house could help him. He had built expectations around it. He had spoken to creditors. He had created a financial plan based on money he didn't possess. And Malcolm had allowed him to believe that plan was realistic. That evening I confronted my husband. Did you know he was in the living room reading? Know what that Trevor told his creditors there might be money from a family property sale? Malcolm lowered the newspaper. Where did you hear that, Trevor? His face told me enough. You knew. I knew he'd discussed possibilities. That's not what I asked. He was trying to buy time. With my house. With a potential sale. A sale I refused. Malcolm stood. He was desperate. And you encouraged him. I told him I would try to help. How Malcolm didn't answer. I stepped closer. Did you tell Trevor I would eventually agree? I told him we'd work something out. That's not the same thing. It was hope. No, Malcolm. It was a promise you didn't have the right to make. His face crumpled slightly. For the first time I saw how frightened he really was. He's my son. I know. I can't stand there and watch him lose everything. You may have to. Malcolm stared at me. How can you say that? Because sometimes loving someone means letting them face what they created. He made mistakes. Yes. Everyone makes mistakes. Yes. So why shouldn't family help? We can help. With what? A few $1,000s advice. Dinner. If that's what we can safely give. He shook his head. That won't save him. Then maybe we can't save him. The words seemed to physically hurt Malcolm. He sank into his chair. For a moment I saw not the man who had betrayed my trust, but a father terrified of watching his child fall. I almost crossed the room to comfort him. Almost. Then I remembered the valuation report, the realtor, the listing, the documents. Compassion could not require surrender. I sat across from him. Malcolm, did you ever actually ask yourself whether saving Trevor would destroy something between us? He looked at me. I thought you'd understand. I do understand. No, you don't. I understand that you're afraid for your son. What you don't understand is that your fear doesn't give you ownership of my choices. He looked down. I softened my voice. Come to Howard's office. Why? Because whatever happens next, I want the truth in the room with all of us. Malcolm remained silent for a long time. Finally, he nodded. Trevor, too, yes. He won't like it. Neither did I when he had my house valued. Malcolm almost smiled. Almost. Then I added, Natalie is coming. His head lifted. Why? Because she's my daughter, and because I want someone there who isn't financially depending on the answer. That hurt him. I saw it. But it was true. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning, 2 days away. That night I lay awake thinking about the old file in Howard's office, about my father's handwriting, about Trevor promising creditors money from a house he didn't own, and about Malcolm sitting across from me, insisting that love required me to sacrifice security so his son wouldn't have to face failure. For weeks I had thought the question was whether I would sell my home. Now I understood the real question. How far had Malcolm been willing to go because he believed he could? And on Thursday morning in Howard Bennett's office, we were finally going to find out. Thursday morning arrived with rain. Not a dramatic storm, just a steady gray drizzle that covered Richmond and made everything outside Howard Bennett's office look washed of color. Natalie picked me up at 9. You sure you want me in there? She asked as we pulled into the parking garage. Yes. What if Malcolm thinks I'm taking sides? I looked out the window. He already thinks anyone who disagrees with him is taking sides. Natalie didn't respond. She reached across the console and squeezed my hand. We arrived 10 minutes early. Howard's receptionist showed us into the same conference room where I'd sat 2 days earlier. The old Mercer file wasn't there, not yet. I noticed immediately. Natalie sat beside me. You okay, no? Good. I looked at her. She smiled faintly. I'd be worried if you weren't nervous. That made me laugh. Just once. But I needed it. At exactly 9:30, the conference room door opened. Malcolm entered first. Trevor followed. Malcolm wore the navy jacket he usually saved for church and funerals. Trevor was dressed as though he were attending a business meeting carrying a leather portfolio under one arm. Neither smiled. Malcolm looked at Natalie. I didn't realize this was a family conference. Natalie started to respond. I touched her arm. I asked her to come. Malcolm sat opposite me. Trevor took the chair beside him. Again, always beside him. I wondered if either of them realized how clearly they had divided the room. Howard entered a moment later. Good morning. No one answered enthusiastically. Howard introduced himself to Trevor and greeted Malcolm. You remember me? Malcolm asked. Of course. You did some work for Walter years ago. I did. Malcolm nodded. Then he placed his folder on the table. Well, hopefully we can clear this up quickly. Trevor glanced at his watch. Howard noticed. I don't recommend rushing property matters, Mr. Atwood. Trevor leaned back. I just mean the situation isn't particularly complicated. Howard looked at him. That would be useful if true. Natalie lowered her eyes. I knew she was hiding a smile. Malcolm opened his folder. I think we should start with the documents Georgina has been questioning. Howard nodded. Go ahead. For the next 15 minutes, Malcolm presented his case. Hearing it in a lawyer's office made it sound even stranger. He explained that we had been married for 38 years, that we had combined finances, that he had contributed to taxes, maintenance, repairs, renovations, insurance, and household expenses, that I had signed documents over the years granting him authority over certain financial matters. He placed each document in front of Howard as though laying down cards in a winning hand. Trevor added his own interpretation. From a practical standpoint, he said this has functioned as marital property for decades. Howard made a note. Trevor continued. Whatever the original circumstances were, Mr. Atwood has financially contributed to the property for almost 40 years. Howard looked up. Are you an attorney, Mr. Atwood? Trevor stiffened. No. Then let's be careful about legal conclusions. Trevor glanced at Malcolm. I said nothing. That was the strangest part. For weeks I had argued, defended, explained. Now I simply listened. Malcolm seemed irritated by my silence. Finally, he turned toward me. Do you disagree with anything I've said? I disagree with what you think it means. His mouth tightened. Howard raised a hand. Let's keep this focused. He pulled Malcolm's documents toward himself. I've reviewed these already. Trevor leaned forward, and Howard removed his glasses. Several establish financial authority regarding particular jointly managed assets and accounts. Others concern estate planning and beneficiary arrangements. Malcolm nodded. Exactly. Howard continued. None of them by themselves establish what you're claiming about ownership of the Hawthorne Avenue property. Malcolm's confidence faltered. That's not what I was told. By whom? He hesitated. People familiar with our finances. Howard waited. No name came. Trevor stepped in. The point is that after 38 years, Dad has substantial marital rights. Howard looked at him. The question before us is not whether your father has rights arising from his marriage. Then what is the question? The question is whether those rights allow him to unilaterally sell this particular property. Trevor folded his arms, and Howard looked down at the documents. No, one word. The entire room changed. Malcolm stared at him. What do you mean, no? I mean these documents do not establish unilateral authority to sell the house. But Georgina signed them. Yes. She gave me financial authority. In specified areas. The house is a financial asset. Not all assets are governed by the same ownership structure. Malcolm leaned forward. You're splitting hairs. No. I'm distinguishing legal interests. Trevor opened his portfolio. I have information on Virginia marital property law. Howard stopped him. Put that away. Trevor froze. Excuse me. We are not litigating a divorce today, and internet printouts about marital property will not answer the specific ownership question. Natalie looked at me. I kept my eyes on Howard. Malcolm's voice grew sharper. Then what does Howard closed Malcolm's folder? The sound was quiet, but it felt final. These documents aren't the ones that determine ownership of the house. No one spoke. Trevor recovered first. Then which documents do Howard look toward the conference room door? One moment. He left. Malcolm turned toward me immediately. What did you give him? Nothing you haven't seen. Then what is he talking about? I don't know. You expect me to believe that? Yes. Trevor leaned toward his father. This doesn't change anything. Natalie finally spoke. You don't know that. Trevor looked at her. This doesn't concern you. She didn't flinch. It concerns my mother. Stay out of it, Malcolm said. Trevor. Natalie leaned back. I'm perfectly happy to let the lawyer talk. So was I. The door opened. Howard returned carrying the old file case. The moment I saw Walter Mercer written across the front, my chest tightened. Howard placed it on the table. Malcolm stared at it. What is that? My father's file, I said. Howard sat. Trevor looked impatient. With all due respect, Walter Mercer has been dead for years. Howard looked at him. Fortunately, properly executed documents don't stop existing when the person who created them dies. Trevor's face reddened. Howard opened the case. He removed several folders and arranged them carefully. Then he pulled out one document. It was old enough that the paper had turned slightly cream. He placed it on the table. My eyes went immediately to the bottom of the page. There it was, Walter Mercer, my father's signature. For a moment I wasn't in that conference room anymore. I was 20-something again, standing beside Dad in a parking lot while he told me that protection wasn't accusation, it was preparation. Malcolm reached toward the document. Howard placed his hand over it. Let me explain what we're looking at first. What is it? Malcolm demanded. Howard looked at me. A document concerning the property. What kind of document? Trevor's voice had lost some of its confidence. Howard didn't answer him. He looked at me instead. Georgina, before I proceed, I want your permission to discuss the contents of this file in front of everyone present. I glanced at Natalie, then Malcolm, finally Trevor. The two men who had spent weeks talking about my home without me were now waiting for my permission to hear what my father had done with it. The irony wasn't lost on me. You have my permission. Howard nodded. He turned the first page. Malcolm leaned forward. Trevor did the same. Howard began explaining dates, my parents' names, the address, the circumstances under which the documents had been prepared. Then Trevor interrupted. Can we skip the history and get to the part that matters? Howard stopped. The room went silent. Trevor continued. Who owns the house? Malcolm looked at Howard. So did Natalie. So did I. Howard closed his mouth and glanced toward me. I suddenly understood why he had wanted everyone in the room. Not because he needed witnesses, because he wanted there to be no second version of this conversation later. No Malcolm saying Howard had meant something different. No Trevor claiming I'd misunderstood. No one telling me I was confused. For weeks, everyone else had been interpreting documents for me. Now I wanted the one document Malcolm hadn't bothered to find to speak for itself. I looked at Howard, my voice was steady. Howard. He waited. I placed my hand on the table. Read the document. Howard looked down at my father's signature. Then he turned to the first operative paragraph. Across from me, Malcolm's face had gone pale. Trevor was no longer checking his watch. And as Howard drew breath to begin reading, I realized something that sent a chill through me. For the first time since this nightmare began, neither Malcolm nor Trevor knew what was coming next. Howard adjusted his glasses and began to read. At first, the language sounded exactly like what I expected from a legal document written decades earlier. Formal, dense, almost deliberately difficult to understand. He read my parents' names, the address of the Hawthorne Avenue property, the date the arrangement had been established, and the name of the trust. I watched Malcolm. His eyes remained fixed on Howard. Trevor leaned forward with his elbows on the table. Then Howard reached the section that mattered. He stopped reading word for word and looked at us. Let me translate this into plain English. Trevor nodded impatiently. Please. Howard turned slightly toward me. Before Georgina married Malcolm Walter and Eleanor Mercer, established a trust structure concerning the Hawthorne Avenue property. I felt Natalie shift beside me. Howard continued. The purpose was to preserve the property for Georgina's benefit while protecting her right to occupy and control decisions concerning its disposition. Malcolm frowned. What does that mean exactly? It means the house was not simply transferred into Georgina's unrestricted personal ownership and then later absorbed into ordinary marital finances. Trevor immediately interrupted. But she's the beneficiary. Yes, so she owns it. Howard looked at him. Beneficial interest and legal title within a trust structure are not concepts. I'm going to reduce inaccurately just to make this conversation faster. Trevor sat back. Howard continued. What matters today is this: the property remained governed by the trust terms. Malcolm pointed toward his folder. And the documents Georgina signed later. Do not override this arrangement merely because they give you authority over other financial matters. Malcolm stared at him. That can't be right. Howard's voice remained calm. It is. I've paid taxes on that house. I understand. Insurance. Yes. Repairs. I understand that too. I paid for half the new roof. Howard nodded. That may establish contributions. It does not by itself rewrite the trust. Malcolm looked at me. I couldn't read his expression. Trevor tried again. Dad has lived there almost 40 years. Yes, he's treated it as his home. I don't dispute that. Then how can you sit there and say he has no ownership? Howard folded his hands. I'm saying something more specific. Your father does not have the unilateral ownership authority he has been claiming. Trevor's face tightened. So he can't sell it? Howard looked directly at him. No. The word landed differently this time. There was no ambiguity left. Trevor stared at Howard. Not without Georgina, correct. And the equity. What about it? Can the property be used to secure financing, not by your father acting alone? Trevor's jaw clenched. What if Dad has power of attorney? Howard gestured toward Malcolm's documents. Not the kind of authority shown here, and not in a way that simply erases the restrictions governing this property. Malcolm looked down at his hands. For the first time since this began, he seemed smaller. Not physically, just stripped of certainty. I was told those documents gave me control. Howard's expression softened slightly. Control over some matters, but not the house, not in the way you believed. Silence filled the room. I should have felt victorious. For weeks, Malcolm and Trevor had treated my refusal like an inconvenience. They had valued the house, spoken with a realtor, prepared marketing language, discussed equity, promised creditors the possibility of money. Then Malcolm had looked across our dining table and told me the house wasn't mine anymore. Now a lawyer was telling him he had never possessed the authority he thought he did. I should have wanted to smile. I didn't. I wanted to cry. Because winning an argument doesn't feel like winning when the person you defeat is your husband. Howard turned another page. There is another provision you should understand. I looked at him. What provision? Your father was very specific about the circumstances under which the property could be sold or transferred. Trevor leaned forward again. Howard continued. He wanted Georgina to retain meaningful decision-making power regarding any voluntary sale during her lifetime. I swallowed. Dad did that. Yes. Why? Howard looked down at the document. There is correspondence in the file explaining his thinking. Malcolm's head lifted. Correspondence, letters, and notes between Walter and this office. My chest tightened. Howard removed a sheet from another folder. He didn't read it. Instead, he summarized. Your father wasn't predicting a specific conflict. He wasn't accusing Malcolm or anyone else. Malcolm looked relieved for half a second. Howard continued. Walter had watched several people in his generation become financially dependent after marriage, widowhood, illness, or family pressure. He believed a permanent home gave his daughter a measure of independence. My eyes burned. I remembered Dad on the back porch. A woman should always have something no one can take away from her. All those years I'd thought it was advice. It hadn't been only advice. He had built protection around it. Natalie reached for my hand beneath the table. I held on. Trevor shook his head. This is insane. Howard turned toward him. Excuse me. My company could collapse over paperwork written decades ago by a man who had no idea what our situation would be today. I stared at him. Howard's expression remained calm. Your company isn't collapsing because of this document. Trevor laughed bitterly. You don't know anything about my company. Correct. Then don't tell me why it's collapsing. Howard leaned back. Then let me phrase it differently. This trust did not create your debts. Trevor went silent. It did not create your development problems. It did not make promises to your creditors. And it did not obligate Georgina's home to rescue your business. Trevor's face reddened. Malcolm said quietly, That's enough. No. Trevor snapped. It isn't. He turned to me. You're really going to sit there and let this happen? I stared at him. Let what happen? Everything I've built. I didn't build your debt. You can stop this. At what cost? You'd still have a home. His voice echoed through the conference room. Natalie started to rise. I squeezed her hand. I didn't need protecting. Not now. I looked at Trevor. You still think this is about whether I'd have somewhere to sleep? What else is it about my right to decide? He shook his head. That's selfish. Malcolm closed his eyes. Trevor. But I wasn't angry. Something had become painfully clear. Trevor genuinely believed that because my sacrifice could solve his problem, refusing to sacrifice made me responsible for the consequences. I spoke quietly. You made a promise using money that was never yours. I said there might be a sale. You expected one. Because Dad said... He stopped. I turned toward Malcolm. The room changed again. What did your father say? Trevor looked away. Malcolm's face went pale. Malcolm. He rubbed his forehead. I told him I would find a way to convince me silence, or a way around me. I didn't know it would get this far. My chest hurt. It got far enough for you to tell me I didn't own my home. He looked at me. For once, he had no defense. Howard quietly slid the trust document toward me. I looked down at my father's signature. There was nothing dramatic about it, just ink on old paper. But suddenly I could see him. Walter Mercer kneeling on the porch with a hammer. Walter checking the locks twice before bed. Walter telling me not to depend on someone else's permission for security. I ran one finger near his signature without touching it. He knew I whispered. Howard shook his head gently. No, Georgina. I looked up. He didn't know this would happen. Then why did he do it? Because he knew it could. That distinction broke something open inside me. Dad hadn't distrusted Malcolm. He had understood life. People changed under pressure. Love could become fear. Fear could become control. And good intentions could become justification for terrible choices. I looked across the table at Malcolm. He wasn't a stranger. That was what hurt most. I was still the man who had sat beside me in hospitals, buried parents with me, celebrated anniversaries with me, and made coffee every morning. And he was also the man who had decided my no was something to overcome. Malcolm looked at Howard. So I never owned it, Howard answered carefully. You never held the ownership authority you believed you did. Malcolm looked at me. 38 years passed silently between us. Then he whispered, I thought it was ours. My eyes filled. So did I. He looked confused. I continued, not legally. In every way that mattered to me. That hurt him. I could see it. I made it ours because I loved you, Malcolm. He lowered his eyes. You didn't need a document for that. I looked at my father's signature. But apparently, I needed one to remind you that making something ours didn't make me powerless. No one spoke. Trevor stared at the table. Natalie held my hand. Howard closed the file. And I finally understood the truth. My father hadn't left me a weapon to use against my husband. He had left me a boundary my husband couldn't cross. There was a difference. A very important one. And as we walked out of Howard Bennett's office that morning, the house on Hawthorne Avenue had not changed at all. The same porch, the same rooms, the same dogwood tree. But the balance of power had. Malcolm couldn't sell it. Trevor couldn't borrow against it. And no amount of pressure could turn my refusal into permission. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly where I stood. The harder question was whether Malcolm would ever stand beside me again. I didn't go home with Malcolm after the meeting. Natalie drove me. Malcolm stood beside his car in the parking lot as we pulled away, one hand resting on the roof, watching us leave. I turned my face toward the window. For weeks, I had imagined what it would feel like to prove him wrong. I thought there would be relief, maybe even satisfaction. Instead, I felt grief. The house was safe. My marriage wasn't. When Natalie pulled into my driveway, she turned off the engine but didn't unlock the doors. Do you want me to stay? I looked at the house. No, Mom. I need to talk to him. Are you sure? Yes. She studied me. You don't owe him comfort just because he's upset. I know. That was something I was finally beginning to understand. I kissed her cheek. I'll call you tonight. Malcolm arrived almost an hour later. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I heard his key in the front door. For 38 years, that sound had meant my husband was home. That afternoon, it made my stomach tighten. He walked into the kitchen. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Malcolm pulled out the chair opposite me. Where's Trevor? I asked. He left. Where? I don't know. Is he angry? Malcolm laughed bitterly. What do you think? I think he's been angry since I refused to finance his mistakes. Malcolm looked down. He's scared. So are you. Yes. It was the first time he had admitted it plainly. I waited. Malcolm rubbed his hands together. I should have told you how bad things were. Yes, I thought I could handle it. You mean you thought you could handle me? His head lifted. That isn't fair. Isn't it? I was trying to solve a problem. You keep saying that as though the problem belonged to us. He's my son, I know. You say that like it doesn't matter. It matters enormously. I leaned forward. But Trevor being your son does not make his debt my obligation. Malcolm looked away. He could lose his company. Yes. Maybe his house. Yes. His credit could be ruined. I know. How can you sit there so calmly? Because I spent weeks panicking over whether you could take away my home. I don't have any panic left. That silenced him. I continued. You were so afraid Trevor might lose his security that you were willing to threaten mine. I never wanted you to feel threatened. You told me the house wasn't mine anymore. His eyes closed. I know. No, Malcolm. I need you to hear it. I said I know. You looked at me across our dining table and told me that the home I brought into this marriage no longer belonged to me because you believed you had enough paperwork to overrule my decision. His face tightened. I was angry. You had the folder ready before the argument started. He looked at me. That was the part he couldn't explain away. The documents, the valuation, the realtor, the listing. None of those things had happened in anger. They had happened through planning. I thought the legal situation was different, he said. That isn't the point. Then what is the point is that you wanted it to be different. He stared at me. You wanted to have the power to sell after I said no. His voice dropped. I wanted to save Trevor. At my expense. At our expense. No. I shook my head. You don't get to hide behind our anymore. He flinched. For 38 years, I called that house ours because I loved you. I never kept score over who paid for the furnace or the roof. I never reminded you that my parents were here first. I never made you feel like you needed permission to belong. I know. But the moment I wouldn't do what you wanted, you started counting. His eyes filled. I continued anyway. You counted taxes, repairs, renovations, years of marriage. Every contribution became evidence that you deserved the power to overrule me. I was desperate. Yes. And desperate people make mistakes. Sometimes. I held his gaze. But desperation doesn't erase responsibility. Malcolm lowered his head. For several moments he said nothing. Then quietly Trevor came to me 3 months ago. I waited. He was already in deeper trouble than he admitted to you. How deep? Deep enough that he couldn't refinance normally. He'd guaranteed some obligations personally. He needed liquidity quickly. And you decided the house was the answer. Not immediately. When he swallowed. When he showed me what it was worth. The valuation. I felt sick. He said we could buy something smaller and still have plenty left. It sounded... He stopped. Practical. His eyes met mine. Yes. That word again. I convinced myself you would understand. And when I didn't, I thought you'd change your mind. And when I didn't... He looked away. I started asking whether I had another option. There it was. The truth. Not a misunderstanding. Not Trevor acting alone. Malcolm had deliberately searched for a way around my refusal. My eyes burned. You asked people whether you could sell without me. Yes. The honesty hurt more than another lie would have. And when they told you those financial documents might give you authority, I believed them. You wanted to believe them. He didn't argue. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the dogwood tree moved in the wind. I need Trevor out of our finances. Malcolm looked up. What, no more discussions with him about our accounts, retirement savings, investments, or this property? He's my son. You can be his father without making him a partner in our marriage. Malcolm was silent. I also want our joint retirement assets protected. Nothing goes to Trevor without both of us agreeing. I wouldn't... You almost sold the house. He stopped. Those are my boundaries. He rubbed his forehead. And if I don't agree, I turned around. Then we don't have anything left to discuss. His face changed. What does that mean? It means I think we should live separately for a while. Malcolm stared at me. No. The word came immediately. I almost smiled at the irony. You don't get to say no for both of us. Georgina, don't do this. I'm not punishing you. That's exactly what this is. No. I walked back to the table. If I wanted revenge, I would be celebrating what happened in Howard's office. I'm not. I feel sick about it. Then why are you asking me to leave because I don't feel safe trusting you right now? His eyes filled. I would never hurt you. You already did. He looked down. The anger drained out of him. I love you. I love you too. His head lifted quickly. Perhaps he thought that solved something. It didn't. That is what makes this so painful. Then give me a chance to fix it. I am. He frowned. By sending me away, by refusing to pretend one apology repairs what happened. I sat across from him. If you want this marriage, Malcolm, then stop trying to rescue Trevor from every consequence of his choices. He's my son, and you're his father, not his insurance policy. Malcolm wiped his eyes. I had rarely seen him cry. My instinct was to reach across the table. I didn't. Not because I wanted him to suffer, because comforting him too quickly would allow both of us to avoid what needed to happen. I don't know how to watch him fail, he whispered. Then learn. He looked at me. That sounds cruel. No. Cruel would be letting him destroy everyone around him because none of us can tolerate seeing him face consequences. Malcolm sat quietly. Finally, he nodded. Where am I supposed to go? Your brother has a guest room. He gave a sad laugh. You've thought this through. Since the moment you told me my home wasn't mine. That hurt him. But some truths were supposed to. Malcolm packed a suitcase that evening. Before leaving, he stood in the hallway. 38 years seemed to fill the space between us. I am sorry, Georgie. I know. Do you believe me? Yes. Does that matter? I swallowed. It matters. He waited, but it isn't enough yet. Malcolm nodded. Then he left. I listened to his car disappear down the street. The house became completely silent. I stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by everything I had fought to protect. And for the first time, I understood that keeping the house had been the easy part. Now I had to decide whether the man who nearly took away my right to choose could ever earn back the privilege of sharing that choice with me. The first week without Malcolm was harder than I expected. I had asked him to leave. I knew why I had done it. And every morning I still found myself reaching automatically for a second coffee mug. 38 years creates habits that anger cannot erase. The first morning I put the mug back. The second morning I cried. By the fourth, I could sit at the kitchen table alone without feeling as though the empty chair were accusing me. Natalie visited often, but I asked her not to make Malcolm the villain. He made terrible choices, I told her. That doesn't mean every year before them was a lie. She nodded. I can be angry without rewriting your whole marriage. That mattered to me. Because healing, I was beginning to understand, required truth in both directions. Malcolm had betrayed my trust. He had also loved me for most of my adult life. Both things could be true. Trevor's situation moved much faster. His development company didn't collapse overnight. But the rescue he had expected from Hawthorne Avenue disappeared immediately. Without it, he had to face his creditors honestly. He sold a vacation property he had been trying to protect. He sold an expensive SUV. He withdrew from one unfinished development and negotiated extensions on another. Eventually, one of his partners agreed to restructure part of the debt in exchange for greater control of the company. Trevor hated that. But he kept the business alive. Smaller. Damaged. No longer entirely his. Alive. The strange thing was that the catastrophe he had predicted never quite happened. He lost things. He lost money. He lost status. He lost the illusion that every bad decision could be repaired without sacrifice. But he didn't lose everything. 3 weeks after Malcolm moved out, Trevor came to see me. He arrived alone. No pastries, no portfolio, no father beside him. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside immediately. What do you need? He looked uncomfortable. To talk. About money, no. That was enough for me to step aside. We sat in the living room. Trevor looked around as though he were seeing the house differently. His eyes stopped on a framed photograph of him and Natalie as children. He was 8 in the picture. Natalie was 6. Both were covered in mud from the backyard. I remember that day, he said. You blamed Natalie for pushing you into the flower bed. She did. She was standing 10 feet away. He almost smiled. Then his expression changed. I was awful to you. I didn't answer. I kept telling myself it was business. It was. He looked surprised. I continued. That was part of the problem. You were looking at my home and seeing a business solution. He nodded. I know. Do you? I do now. He rubbed his hands together. When Howard said the trust didn't create my debts, he stopped. That stayed with me. It should. I was furious with him. I noticed. Trevor gave a small, embarrassed laugh. I drove around for 2 hours after that meeting, blaming everyone, including me, mostly you. I appreciated the honesty. Then I went back to my office and looked at the numbers. He stared at the floor. And the house wouldn't have fixed everything. I felt my chest tighten. What? It would have bought time. Maybe enough. Maybe not. I stared at him. For months, he had treated selling my home as the difference between survival and destruction. You knew that I suspected it, and you still pushed us. I was scared. I leaned back. That seems to be the explanation everyone keeps giving me. I'm not asking you to excuse it. Good. He nodded. I came to apologize. I waited. For the valuation, the realtor, the listing draft, for telling creditors there might be family money, for putting Dad in the middle. You didn't put Malcolm anywhere he refused to go. Trevor looked at me. No, that answer mattered. He wasn't blaming his father, and I wasn't allowing Malcolm to hide behind his son. Trevor stood to leave. At the doorway, he stopped. I don't expect you to forgive me. Forgiveness isn't the same as pretending it didn't happen. I know. I may forgive you. He looked back. But you'll never make decisions about my property again. He nodded. I understand. Good. Then he left. Malcolm took longer. He called twice a week. At first, our conversations were short. Then one evening, he asked if I would meet him for dinner. I chose a small restaurant near the James River. Neutral ground. Malcolm looked older when he walked in. Not dramatically, just tired. We ordered dinner, but neither of us ate much. Finally, he said, I've been seeing someone. I raised an eyebrow. He almost choked. A counselor. I laughed before I could stop myself. Malcolm smiled. It was the first easy moment we'd shared in weeks. Good, I said. He asked me why Trevor's failure felt like my failure. I waited. I didn't have an answer. Do you now? Malcolm looked toward the window. Trevor's mother and I divorced when he was little. I spent years feeling like I'd failed him. I knew that. But I think I spent the rest of his life trying to make sure he never felt abandoned again. His eyes met mine. Somewhere along the way, helping him became rescuing him. I said nothing. And when you said no, I didn't hear a boundary. What did you hear that you were forcing me to abandon my son? My throat tightened. So you chose him. Malcolm shook his head. No, that's what I told myself. He leaned forward. What I actually did was choose my fear over your trust. That was the first apology that reached me. Not because it was prettier, because it contained responsibility. I don't expect to come home tonight, he said. Good. He smiled sadly. I don't expect you to trust me because I'm sorry. Good. Good. I want to earn it. That took longer. Months, not days. We met for dinner, then coffee. Eventually, Malcolm came by to repair a loose porch rail. He asked permission before touching anything. I teased him about that. But privately, I noticed. He stopped discussing my finances with Trevor. We met with an independent financial advisor and separated certain accounts more clearly. I kept Howard involved in every decision concerning the house. Not because I wanted Malcolm excluded, because clarity had become part of trust. 6 months after he left, Malcolm came home. Not because I needed him, not because he had nowhere else to go, because I chose to ask him back. The first evening we sat on the porch beneath the dogwood tree. Malcolm looked at the branches. Walter really did think of everything. I smiled. Almost. He would have hated me for what I did. No. Malcolm looked surprised. My father didn't waste much time hating people. What would he have done? I thought about it. He would have made you repair something. Malcolm laughed. Then I became serious. He would have expected you to learn. Malcolm nodded. I am. The house never went on the market. Trevor rebuilt his company slowly on a smaller scale. Natalie eventually stopped checking on me every morning. Howard returned my father's documents to secure storage, though I kept copies in a place I could reach myself. And one afternoon, I found the old valuation report in a drawer. For a moment, I stared at the number Trevor had once believed could solve everything. Then I tore the report in half. Not because the house had no financial value. It did, but its greatest value had never been the equity. It was choice. The choice to stay, the choice to leave, the choice to help someone, the choice to say no, the choice to forgive without surrendering the lesson. My father had understood something I didn't understand until I was 67 years old. Security isn't simply having something in your name. It's knowing that love does not require you to give away your voice. And that was the document's real gift. It didn't save my house from Malcolm. It gave Malcolm and me the chance to save our marriage from what fear had turned us into.